Good morning, all of you. This is the platform of Gyan Sagar Civil Academy. Earlier, we have discussed about the basic definitions of economics, microeconomics, macroeconomics. Then we completed national income. Now we are discussing poverty. So we are talking here types of the poverty. There are different types of the poverty. One is the absolute poverty, another is the relative poverty, third one is the chronic poor, chronic type of a poverty, then churning poor, next one is occasionally poor. So in the last lecture we completed relative poverty and absolute poverty. Here we are discussing chronic poor. Chronic poor means who are always remain poor, who are always remain poor and usually poor, so that will come under chronic poor. Chronic poor means the consistency of the poverty. If an individual or the households whose remain below the poverty line, usually sometimes they may cross the limit of the threshold limit of the poverty line, but sometime for a certain days, for selected days, always they remain under the poverty. So we can say that is the chronic poor. Chronic poor further classified as a always poor and usually poor. Here we mean always poor. From this diagram we can present here that is the chronic poverty, chronic poor. The persons whose households whose always remain under the poverty line. This is the poverty line, and those individuals and the families, households whose are remain below this line, they will be considered as a always poor, because the graph of the poverty line, this is the poverty line, this is the poverty line. This is the poverty line. So those individuals or those households whose remain always below the poverty line, they are considered as a always poor. Sometimes these individuals and households whose are remain always poor, they jumped up across the limit of the poverty line for a selective days, just like this graph is indicating here, depicts here, ki the family or the individual cross the limit of the poverty line for a selected days, so it will be called as the usually poor. And always poor and usually poor are categorized as the chronic poor. So what is the chronic poor? Who are always poor and those who are usually poor, but who may sometimes a little more money, are grouped together as a chronic poor. So in chronic poor, people are always remain under the poverty line, or always they are remain the poverty line, but for the little bit of the days they cross the limit of the poverty line, they are considered as the usually poor. The always poor and usually poor is grouped as the chronic poor. Next we are discussing here the churning poor, who regularly move in and out of the poverty. What is the churning poor? The families, the household, or any individuals who come up and down from the poverty line, who come up and down from the poverty lines. This is the poverty line. The family and individuals who's come up and down from the poverty line. And suppose that this is the poverty line, so they come up and down from the poverty line, so it will be called the churning poor. So what is the churning poor? Who regularly move in and out of the poverty line, they are considered as a churning poor. For example, small farmers, seasonal workers, they have the sufficient amounts of the money to sustain their life. But if they are fallen sick or not able to do any work for a certain date, selected date, then they come below the poverty. So they are reeling under the casual workers and like that and seasonal worker. If they find the jobs, they cross the limit of the poverty. If they are in lean seasons, they come below the poverty line. Next point, here we are discussing about the occasionally poor. This is the occasionally poor. Occasionally poor, almost they are above the line of the poverty line. This is the poverty line. Always they remain above the limit, threshold limit of the poverty line. Sometimes they come below this poverty line. They are considered as the occasionally poor. Occasionally poor means the families or individuals, they are remain always non-poor. They remain always non-poor, but sometimes they come below the poverty line. This is called the occasionally poor. Next point here, one thing I also mentioned, cyclic poor. What is the cyclic poor? They are remain always non-poor, but sometimes they became poor caused by job losses, food security due to the natural calamity, fluctuations in business cycle. The families whose are remain always non-poor, but sometime they loses their jobs due to the business cycle. Sometimes they are facing the problem of food security due to the flood, due to the any disaster like the earthquake. They are considered as the cyclic poor. And one thing say that I are here, those peoples whose are never come below this poverty line, they are called the never poor or non poor. This group they come never they always remain above this line. They are considered the non poor or never poor. Again, I reminding peoples, poverty line I categorized in a broad way. Chronic poor, this chronic poor is further classified as always poor. Those remain always below this line of the poverty. Usually poor, they remain almost poor, but sometimes they cross the threshold limits of the poverty. Churning poor, the you always poor and usually poor in a broad context is called the chronic poor. What is the chronic poor? They are always poor or they are usually poor. Always poor and usually poor. I mentioned here usually poor and always poor. They will come under the chronic poor. Next one is the transient poor. Transient poor means they are nearby the line of poverty. They are existing nearby the line of the poverty. So they are called the transient poor. Sometimes they come up and sometimes they come down. So they are the transient poor. Most of the times they come up and down. So they are called the churning poor. When transient poor are almost remain non-poor, but for a little days or certain days they come below this line, they are considered as the occasionally poor. So transient poor is further classified as a churning poor and occasional poor. Next point is a neighbor poor. Those are those families, households whose remain always above this line. There is a huge gap between this line. So they are always remain above this line. They are called the neighbor poor or non-poor. One thing say that I want also to mention here, and 1 year in I think say UPSC and like that examination, say one question was asked, capability approach. What is the capability approach? In normal way, we are deciding the poverty line on the basis of human like the dietary dietary food intake, nutritional requirements, expenditure and income, like that. But Amartya Sen, he said कि poverty line या poverty must be considered based on the capability. What is the capability? Those persons who's having the capability, those are having the freedom and opportunity for being and doing. For being means for being healthy, for being educated, and doing means all those things that they want to do for their survival. So it is the approach, it is the theory and a principle that was given by Professor Amartya Sen, and this theory is the capability approach. He said, beside the income approach, beside the income approach, beside the expenditure approach, if we are considering the poverty on the basis of capability approach, then it is more better. How it is better? Because here people must have the freedom and opportunities for being and doing. People must have the opportunity for being and doing. One year question was asked, I think, say, and in option there was mentioned what was the approach given by the Amartya Sen, and only this word was mentioned there, I think, say, freedom and opportunities. Here freedom means if individuals are having freedom for the development of itself, for making itself as a capable and skillful person, then he would not be remain further a poor. So this is the capability. It's mean poverty estimation से poverty estimation से या poverty measurement से can be categorized into different ways. So now we are discussing here and our next topic, measurement of the poverty. In the next lecture I will complete about the measurement of the poverty. Okay, bye, all the best. ठीक है सर, कट कर दीजिए.